To me, when I think about death and digital legacy and part of my grief process, my son has been dead now for over 7 years. What I really appreciate is that I can still go to his YouTube channel when I feel like I want to hear his voice. I want to see his goofiness. And I could just get a dose of Ryan every once in a while. And that just makes me smile. And I love that.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My guest today is Jonathan Cottor. Am I pronouncing it correct? Cottor, pronouncing it correctly. Awesome. Well, listen, Jonathan, you reached out because I had done a past podcast with a hospice professional with Hospice News, and I was talking about the digital piece, but it was the digital piece that caught your eye because you professionally work in this death and dying space. You'll tell your story, but it is about Ryan, your son, and his digital legacy that he left behind for you. So welcome to the show, and please share with us what got you here today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Niki. I'm super excited for this. And I really reached out to you because I thought that this topic is particularly relevant, very interesting, and that I actually suggested that I might have an angle on this that your listeners, I don't know if you've done this topic before, but certainly from my perspective, something that I was really excited about was my son, Ryan, who died at the age of 17 and a half years old, right in his teenage kind of techno nerd years. He was very much of a gamer, a nerd, had a lot of online presence, and it just seemed to fit really well with the kinds of topics that you're talking about. And then in our preview conversation, there's just so many areas that I was not even aware of from a digital legacy, digital planning perspective when it relates to death and dying. And so I just thought this was just a wonderful merger of lots of different topics that we could be talking about. It kind of sources really from my son, Ryan. And just to kind of ground your listeners in this conversation is that my son, Ryan, was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease called spinal muscular atrophy at the age of 8 months old. He was not expected to live to 2. And at that time, this was back in the early 2001, it was when he was born, there were no treatments and no cures. And so the news that my wife and I were given were, there's no treatments, there's no cures, and don't expect him to live to his second birthday. So literally our world was shattered. And the other interesting component of this whole personal journey was that we're an Arizona family, but at this moment in time, we were actually living in London, England, because my job was a corporate marketer. And my wife and I had been married, and we traveled and we moved from Arizona to the Midwest for a little bit, eventually winding up in Minneapolis. I worked for the Pillsbury Doughboy. It was the Doughboy that then sent us to London for a 3-year expat assignment or an expatriate assignment. The idea was to go to London, live for 3 years, experience that, come back to Minneapolis, raise your family, wouldn't life be good? And that was the general life plan, but that didn't work out for us. In London, couple major things happened. One, General Mills bought the Pillsbury organization. So from a professional standpoint, that really disrupted my career path because the idea of going back to Minneapolis now was cut off. We could have stayed in Europe, but the other component, as I just shared, was that our second son, Ryan, was born, and that's where he was diagnosed. And we were 11 hours away from the closest family member, all back in Arizona. And so our world literally just shattered. And so that's kind of how the beginning of this story starts.
And I always wanted to preface that when I talk to people about death and dying who aren't familiar with or comfortable with the conversation, they immediately think that, oh, dying is for the elderly.
Right.
And I just need to keep bringing this back, that it's indiscriminate. And there are many families like yourself, that are going through this with their children. And I mean, to get that devastating news, so your son, they only gave your son 18 months basically to live.
Yeah.
So, and then 15 plus years later, he's still
he,
building websites and making
yeah, I
videos
mean,
on
so
YouTube and building his digital legacy himself. But what was that, to live with that sort of news for so long for you and your wife? So death was always in the back of your mind.
well, and so Ryan, it was so yes, we were told he wasn't expect to live to his second birthday. As we were approaching his second birthday, so we actually got the diagnosis and still lived in London for about a year and a half before we moved back to the U.S. And I'll mention something that we'll talk about kind of at the end of our or middle to end of our conversation today, but one of the things that we were referred to for family support was the place called Helen House. And Helen House was described to my wife and I as a children's hospice organization. And so that was very scary to us because we were really thrown into this world not understanding any of this stuff. And so when we heard the word hospice, we thought that meant death, that meant dying, giving up. And we didn't want to do that for our son. And so we resisted going to this place for many months. It was the physical therapist that now was integrated into Ryan's care quite a bit. They kept saying that you don't understand. This is a place for living, helping your family with what's called overnight respite, with this term palliative care, which is really psychosocial, emotional supports, because it's just such an exhausting, difficult, stressful journey. How do you find joy in life while you're trying to deal with all the medical care that your child needs, literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? It is like caring for a newborn all the time, more than caring for a newborn. You just don't get sleep. My son couldn't turn himself while he slept. If you put him on his back, he would have stayed in that position. And so about an hour later, he would cry out. My wife or I would go to his room. We would flip him on his side. About an hour later, he would cry out again. My wife or I would go into his room and flip him on his other side. So my wife and I basically learned to live on very little sleep. We never, I don't know what REM sleep even is, because it just was exhausting. And so that concept was a children's hospice home was just, it became, when we finally agreed to go, because we were just at wit's end, it just became an important part of our care support system. We finally agreed to go. It really was not anything like we expected. We thought it was going to be a nursing home. We thought it was going to be a hospital. It wasn't. It was a home away from home. Just our shoulders came down. We got to interact with other families going through these journeys. So as you just mentioned, there are families out there that are going through these journeys. Not, my son had a rare genetic disease, SMA, but that could be a pediatric cancer or a rare cystic, a complicated cystic fibrosis or a Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, or there are many, many, in fact, there are thousands of rare diseases that impact children in their life. Thankfully, in a collective, there are about 22,000 kids in the United States every year that will die of a rare genetic disease. So it's a lot, but it's not that many compared to adult deaths and adult care. But they're out there quite a bit.
Well, let's talk about Ryan's legacy that he left behind. So you
Yeah.
had the gifts, even knowing it wasn't easy. I mean, like you said, there was lack of sleep, that looming idea that he one day could not be around. And so you and your wife were really living moment to moment, knowing that death was imminent, but just didn't know when.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing that's really stressful about children with rare, or just medically fragile, complex medical conditions. Those are terms that are often used for this kind of population. It's how do you coordinate all the umpteen medical appointments and support systems and trying to, all of a sudden yesterday I was a marketer, my wife was a school teacher, and now we're highly trained nurse kind of equivalents as we're trying to care for our son in our own bedroom or in his own bedroom things. But as we went through this journey, it ultimately, we were approaching Ryan's second birthday, and we decided that we were going to come back to Arizona. We came back to Arizona on our last day at Helen House because we had discovered, we'd stayed there many times now in the last year and a half of our stay there, where they would care for Ryan so that we could go home to our own house and get some sleep. And that was just incredibly, we were so grateful to have that a couple of nights of sleep so that we could catch up, recharge, and then get on with the next level of challenges that were going to approach us. And then we could take another break every once in a while. Well, on our last day at Helen House, we asked the team, okay, how do we continue this care in Arizona when we move back to Phoenix? And they said, oh, no, there's none of these in the United States. There were 54 of these kinds of community-based care models across the United Kingdom. None of them existed in the United States. We said, well, that stinks. Nothing we can do about that. We came back to Arizona right before Ryan turned 2. We did celebrate his second birthday, and then a third birthday, and then a fourth birthday, and then a fifth birthday, and the kid kept going. If he was here today, he would describe himself as moldy cheese, way past his expiration date. He was very cheeky, very just awesome kid. And within the first year of being back, my wife started passionately talking about our experiences at Helen House. A community rallied around us, and all of a sudden we ended up building a similar model here in Phoenix called Ryan House, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But I want to kind of, let's stay on the Ryan, who's the computer, the nerd, and kind of some of the stuff that was exciting for you and I to connect in the first place. Because as Ryan grew, remember, this is now the early 2000s, technology, these families have, families like ours have been around for decades, since the dawn of time, right? But Ryan's life so perfectly matched up to technology innovation. So one of the things that was really important in Ryan's life was an iPhone, because Ryan had no strength. He used a power wheelchair for mobility. When he started driving a wheelchair at the age of 2 years old. And that wheelchair was a $65,000 Permobil wheelchair that was highly specialized. He used a mini joystick on the tray because he didn't have physical strength. He couldn't reach.
It's a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I'm thinking, the questions are like plowing through my head right now. It's how, at 2, do you tell a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, like, this might be your last birthday? Or is that constantly it was just part of his upbringing?
And our older son, who was about 2.5 years older, our older son is 2.5 years older than Ryan. He's now 27 years old. But imagine when Ryan is 2, that's Ryan. Ethan is now 4.5. And so he's now very aware of what's going on. And his friends at school are saying, hey, your brother's going to die. How do you deal with that as parents? But how do you deal with that? And how do you as parents coach your older son to handle those kinds of questions when he's being asked by his friends in kindergarten and in first grade and in second grade? It's incredibly difficult. That's why people like that you've had on your podcast before, somebody that's a favorite person of mine, Dr. Justin Baker, that's this idea of pediatric palliative care. Those are the special people in the world. That's the kind of people that I like to surround myself with now, and the work that I do right now.
I'm just going to take this opportunity just to go down the rabbit hole just a little bit. So what did Ryan think about death and his own death and what it meant to him while he's living his life?
Yeah, Ryan, I don't think Ryan necessarily thought as much. Well, it's interesting because as Ryan grew, one of the things that Ryan really absorbed very quickly was technology. And so one of the things that he kind of grew up in an era of influencers, as they were all out there, and the YouTube was kind of growing in popularity, and Ryan wanted to be a YouTube influencer. And so Ryan would record things on his YouTube channel, and sometimes he would actually talk, while he was gaming and recording himself, he would actually talk about his own death. And so, yeah, he was very mature. What was nice was Ryan was very physically challenged, but mentally he was mature beyond his years, very bright, very verbal. Like, he couldn't shut the kid up. He was just, but he could process all of this stuff really, really well. And I think that what he didn't like was he didn't like being referred to as an inspiration. People would often come up to him and say, oh, you're such an inspiration. And he's like, I'm just living my life. Why am I such an inspiration? That was an area that he didn't really like. But death, in the early years, so Ryan died at 17 and a half years old. At 15 years old, the very first FDA-approved treatment for his disease, spinal muscular atrophy, came into the marketplace. Too little, too late for our son, but our son did get some of those injections. It's called Spinraza. It was a spinal injection. But early in middle grade school, we would go to conferences, the SMA conferences every year, and we would learn about the research that was in this field. And we kept saying to Ryan, look, the goal right now is just stay alive. There is so much research happening in this field that there could be treatments, there could be cures, but you have to stay alive. I mean, the thing is, you got to, at the end of the day, you got to keep eating and you got to keep breathing, and everything else we can figure out.
And like I said, I mean, to talk to a 2-year-old,
yeah,
and now, I'm thinking of a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old, and now a 17-year-old, the different phases in the conversations, how profound they must have been. And then he becomes this gamer, has his own, because it's still open, it still exists. People can still hop on it and see, a slice of Ryan today.
Yeah, well, and for those of us that are seeing us through this podcast, they're hearing us, they're not getting the whole full effect. But those that can see us right now, I'm actually using the gaming computer that Ryan and I built together. Because when Ryan hit his early teenage years, he had lots of his friends that were building gaming computers and to be a gamer and to be an influencer. And so he looks at me one day and he goes, Dad, I want to build a computer. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And he goes, well, I want to build a computer. And I'm like, do you mean like, well, order a custom computer online so that it comes in the way you want it? That's fine. He goes, no, I want to build it. And I'm like, okay, to build a computer means that I'm going to build it. And I don't know how to build a computer. So we found a YouTube video, 11-minute YouTube video on how to build a computer. We went to Fry's Electronics, we bought all the parts, and literally it took us about 4 hours watching that 11-minute video on repeat all the time. But we built this computer that I'm now Zooming with. Ryan had a YouTube channel and his best friend, and they would record different things very, and as he was in his teenage years, some of that stuff is pretty inappropriate at this point, but that was fine. That was what he was doing with his friends. And now today, the kind of the net of it and why I actually reached out to you is because to me, when I think about death and digital legacy and part of my grief process, my son has been dead now for over 7 years. And I think about him all the time. He is my North Star. He is still the fuel for what I do and my passion for the work that I do today in terms of scaling these palliative care homes. But what I really appreciate is that I can still go to his YouTube channel when I feel like I want to hear his voice. I want to see his goofiness. And I could just get a dose of Ryan every once in a while. And that just makes me smile. And I love that. And that made me think about, in our first conversation, Ryan had so many gaming passwords and gaming websites and things that he did. And then when he died, that was really hard for my wife and I to figure out, okay, now how do we what are those we're going to keep going? What are those, how do we get into some of these accounts and actually shut them down? How do we reset some passwords to kind of figure that out? He probably had a boatload of stuff that we don't even know about that we never were able to address. So that was kind of some of the stuff that I think synced up to, I think a lot of the work that you're doing too, as well.
No, I mean, I do training on, with hospice professionals.
Yeah.
And for people to know specifically, if we focus on pediatric, since we're talking about Ryan, is that these kids, and Ryan's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Their technology is where they build their lives on, because they're so restricted physically that they can't go out into the world. So their world becomes very digitized. Yeah, so that digital world means that, I mean, he had friends. I mean, he probably had real friends online.
Yeah.
But as he grew older, just like any teenager, there's a level of, I'm not going to disclose, or I'm going to be opening up more accounts than my parents will ever know about.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Here, parents are now, I'm trying to train them, trying to educate them, both the professional social workers and the parents, to say, your children are dependent, their world is digitized, but at the same time, you need to keep them safe. And the headaches that can come once they're gone. And so a little bit about what you did this past weekend with your family.
Yeah.
I shared with you. Had the legacy contacts on your
iPhone.
I
had no idea that would have been helpful in Ryan's, when Ryan died. That would have been very helpful trick that we didn't know about. In our conversation, you told me about on the iPhone platform, and I don't know if the Google platform or other platforms have this too. I'm sure they have probably something equivalent. But on the iPhone platform, they have under securities, you can get down to legacy contact. And what you shared with me was by having a person identified as your legacy contact, if that person were to die, that legacy contact then is able to get access to that phone and get into things. And so what we did as a family just this past weekend, yesterday was Easter, and our family kind of gathered together at my sister's house, and we went through my mom, who is 88, had a stroke a year ago, my mother-in-law, myself. I set up my legacy contact for my older son now, my wife's legacy contact. So we made sure that everybody's legacy contact was now set up in the phones, because I do think that that is something that you just don't think about, and you can't do it after the fact.
So here you are sitting around the Easter table.
Yeah.
And so what was the conversation, or how receptive was everybody else to this? Hey, family of mine, look at this fun feature I just found on the iPhone.
I think in my family is a little bit unique in the sense that our family has been around death and dying quite a bit. There's as I mentioned earlier, my wife and I started a children's, very similar to the model that we were exposed to in England. We did bring that model to the United States, to Phoenix, called Ryan House. We did rally a community here. Ryan House is partnered with a larger organization called Hospice of the Valley, which is very much around adult care. So my family personally has been around death and dying from pediatrics to the whole lifespan for quite a bit. So when I introduced the topic of legacy contact, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, let's just do it. There was no question. There was no problem.
And that's the way it should be. I mean, honestly, that's my mission right now, is just to get people to be like, oh, okay, let's just do this, and not hesitate and get all weird about what the conversation is leading to. It really is just, peace of mind. And for Ryan, though, why you said that so are there still accounts out there so many years later? He passed what year?
He died in 2018, December of 2018, so over 7 years ago. Now, my older son, 27, is also a gamer. He still today at 27 enjoys this. So he and I kind of share this computer. So during the daytime, this is where I home office. So again, those that can visually see us today, I don't blur out my background for anybody, because what you are seeing in the background right now is a X-Men poster and a Avengers kind of poster stuff, but there are Doctor Who posters back here. Some of those posters are autographed. I mean, my son had an awesome life. It was very short. It was very challenging, but we also had some high highs. I mean, we got to meet some people through his life journey that was incredible. And so I love being in this space. One of the things that when I Zoom through today, what I'm doing is taking the Helen House model from England. We created this in Phoenix, Ryan House. There are a lot of communities wanting to do these kinds of care models, and they're really struggling. So upon Ryan's death, that motivated me to create a national center to kind of scale these things. And so now I home office out of this bedroom because I love being in this space. This is the energy. This is Ryan. Ryan didn't die in this room. This is where he lived. And so he died at Ryan House. He lived in this room. And so I just love being around here. But so daytime is kind of my time with this computer. At nighttime, my older son comes in here and games. And some of those gaming platforms, I don't even know what they are. Some of those games are still from Ryan's account in the old days.
So is he playing as Ryan, or he's just...
I think one of them he actually had to go approach, because Ryan had, some of them I think he might still be playing as Ryan, because Ryan had built up levels of different things, and he didn't want to lose that.
Oh,
yeah.
And he'd spent a lot of time earning his.
I don't know. Now you're getting into a world that I'm not a gamer, but my kids certainly were.
But at the same time, this was Ryan's legacy.
Yeah.
And he developed relationships and community, and he did this all digitally. And at the same time, this is part of his, the fact that the room is there and you and your son still live life with.
Ryan was also very, he was an early adopter on lots of technology because he needed to be. So the iPhone was a huge advantage for him because he could put that on his wheelchair tray, and he could move his thumbs enough so that when he was online, he was just like any other kid. As you've said, it is, it's not a kid using a wheelchair. It is not a kid with a rare disease. He is just like anybody else. Loved it. His best friend, able-bodied person, would come over. Ryan bought a green screen. They would film videos with the green screen. Ryan would invest in a really high-end camera. We've got these obnoxious kind of snowball kind of equipment things. Ryan started to do the virtual reality when it first came out, because that was an awesome technology where he could experience things through virtual reality.
Right.
It just, technology.
He lived life.
Oh my
And
gosh,
he built a life in that
I
room.
just so appreciate that. I also recognize that I've got an 11-year-old nephew who is, I almost wish that technology is too much in his life. And I wish that, some of the kids today would kind of dial it back quite a bit to get into social skills and things that I think their kids are missing out with. But back to Ryan specifically, it was everything for Ryan.
And the legacy he left behind.
Yeah.
So let's talk about not just Ryan House. So where is your project with Ryan House, and how are you expanding now in the United States?
Yeah, so these models of care are, now we're kind of describing them as they're community-based, brick and mortar. They're physical places in a community, and Phoenix is a perfect example because Phoenix has Ryan House. My wife, yeah, Phoenix, Arizona. My wife and I never intended to start a nonprofit. We never thought we were doing this. When we came back from England, we were just passionately talking about our experiences at Helen House. A community started to rally around us. Everybody recognized that families whose children are on these very complex life journeys that could end up being shortened lives, children that are not going to live into adulthood, those families need a special level of care. There's a lot of medical care, but it's also psychological care. It's emotional care. It is this concept of anticipatory grief. How do you find joy in your child's journey, knowing that you're also supposed to be planning a funeral? Or how do you handle, end of life and bereavement kinds of supports? So these places have what's called an interdisciplinary team. They're staffed with nurses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that's the medical care. There are lots of prescriptions and how to transfer a kid into a wheelchair, into a bath, etc. But it's also staffed with psychologists, social workers. There's a specialist called a child life specialist, which is really difficult conversations and trying to help families kind of cope with and handle those conversations that Niki, you and I have already kind of been talking about with my older son. How do you help handle those kind of conversations? The child life specialist is particularly good at those. You have chaplain services for those that really faith-based are really important to them. And so you just kind of help these families along these very difficult journeys. And then when and if a child needs end-of-life care, then it becomes a natural children's hospice home. It is not about the death and dying part. It's about the living part, knowing that there may be a shortened life that may need end-of-life care. And so it's really about connecting with families through that entire journey. And then and so Ryan House, we ended up starting Ryan House. We incorporated in 2004. It took us 6 years of raising $8 million to build the physical house, to staff the team. It opened its doors in 2010, so it's now been open for 16 years. It has served thousands of families whose children are going through these kinds of journeys. We've had over 550 children die at Ryan House because it is also a place for end-of-life care. I often tell people, as I said earlier, my son lived in this room and he died at Ryan House. If Ryan had died in this room, that would make this room feel very different to me. And many families choose to have their children die at home, and that's fine. We want to respect wherever that decision is, but many families, if they have the option, would choose to go through that intense, very horrific, tough period of time someplace else where they can be fully supported. And so the challenge with these models, though, is they're beautiful models, but this United States is really designed for adult health care. And so trying to create these children's models in a community like a Phoenix, Arizona, there just is not a healthcare license to appropriately do the kind of care that is needed. And then without a license, there is no reimbursement pathway through Medicaid or through insurance because you need a license to connect the care to.
Let me pause there. Now that's chewing on my brain. So pediatric hospice is not covered?
Hospice is. So So it just depends on your license. So, for
Okay.
example, Ryan House did open in 2010. It is partnered with a larger organization called Hospice of the Valley, and so Ryan House is actually licensed as a hospice. That is, that's fine for when a child is at Ryan House for end of life care, but
Right.
that's
Six
only
months or
about
less.
20% of the usage of the house. About 80% of the usage of the house is for respite
Respite.
care and palliative care support. And so when a child is at Ryan House, Ryan never was designated as hospice. He died at 17 and a half, but it was kind of a traumatic event moment. So Ryan never technically was in hospice. So when Ryan would go event, we never thought Ryan House would be open. We never thought Ryan would be alive when Ryan House opened, but he was. He and his brother untied the rope. Then we almost thought he was going to graduate out because he was 17 and a half years old and Ryan House would serve up to 21. Well, when when a child goes to a Ryan House for respite care, the you can't bill hospice for that because the kid isn't labeled hospice. When the kid is hospice, you can bill that for that. But Ryan House raises $3.5 million a year out of the Arizona community to fund the respite and palliative care support parts of the program, so
Right.
that families don't pay for any of those services. But it's a philanthropy, charity driven machine. And Ryan House is very good at it, exceptionally good at it, and raises $3.5 million a year every single year. But that's really hard for other communities to do. And so when other communities have tried to do, other communities have heard of this model, and there are a lot of passionate leaders that want to do this kind of care in Atlanta, Georgia, in Columbus, Ohio, in Seattle, Washington, New York. But they really struggle with raising that kind of money to support this without a clear license, and then connecting it to these kids are qualified under Medicaid and also primary insurance. And without the license, there's no connected dots. So this growing kind of coalition over the last 20 years had been craving for national leadership to pull these best practices to try and champion this at a national level, but nobody was willing to kind of step up and do this. And I wasn't willing to do that either because I was still very involved in Ryan House. I was still raising, Ryan as a dad. I was still in my corporate career, but then Ryan died. And when Ryan died, that changed everything for me. And I said, you know what? I am so frustrated at the U.S. healthcare system. I think we need to do better, and we need to fix this system. We need to reframe the conversation. I think I have the kind of skill set, the passion. I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to go become a public health expert so I can actually sit at the table and really work with the people that I need to be working with. So I decided to take a year off. I got a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is, and I did the entire program on this gaming computer. So again, it just felt really special for me to kind of be part of Ryan and his electronic legacy when I went through my MPH program, graduated, and then ultimately started an organization called the National Center for Pediatric Palliative Care Homes. And the flagship program is called Children's Respite Homes of America, to really pull this kind of growing coalition together. So we now jump ahead, but we're now 3.5 years into this new organization. I've been able to pull together 51 communities across 29 states, all really trying to champion this kind of care. And we're now working on policy changes, licensing changes. We've passed the first new healthcare license in the state of Iowa. We've now got a bill being introduced into New York, chapter licenses in Alabama. Texas is changing some license language. So there's a lot of momentum around this right now, but it needed a central kind of point that we've now provided for that. And then we've got a lot of pioneers and leaders in these communities that are just thankful because they're like, oh, wow, this really can be done. 20 years ago, when my wife and I started Ryan House, we had none of this. There was none of these programs in the U.S. We were just very thankful that we were connected to some very knowledgeable, experienced local leaders. And now we're able to kind of take that knowledge and share it with other leaders across the country to help make this kind of thing happen in a much bigger way.
I mean, as you said, you're true pioneers.
Yeah.
And it was
Ryan.
Ryan's story. And I say that to people is, you know, losing someone can be the catalyst to your life's mission. Not that we ever wish it, but at the same time, It is. Oh, there's your cup. Oh,
Yeah. I mean,
you lost the picture.
I have coffee in a Ryan cup every single day. I mean, he is, I love my older son, love what he's doing and excited about his life. But Ryan is my North Star, and he's really the fuel that drives this. And I think that, the national effort that we're trying to do is not trying to put Ryan on the poster of and making him the model of that. Ryan House in Phoenix is really special for him and his personal legacy and our family legacy, but he drives me to help others to make this happen for their communities.
That's amazing. Well, listen, this has been an awesome conversation. So our listeners, what is one or two things that they can take away with from what you've shared today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one is just awareness that there really are a lot more families out there than you perhaps have been aware of, and I think that if any of those families are listening, we are trying to get support for you in communities all across America. The best place to go to try and learn more about what's happening in your community is our website called childrensrespitehomes.org. It has a map of the U.S., so if you're in one of those communities, you can find some local groups that are trying to build one of these kinds of programs locally. You could get involved. You could bring your expertise. You could bring your skill set, your passion, your funding, however you need to help these things kind of scale and really support these families, because these are very difficult journeys. And we're trying to change the world.
We are trying to change the world and the conversation.
Yeah.
Like to be able to just empower people that this is part of living. And if when someone wanted to get in touch with you or get involved with your organization, best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I would say the same place. I'd send them to childrensrespitehomes.org. We have e-newsletter that will. That's a great way to contact us. You can reach out on and contact us. We're very responsive, myself, and I've got a small team, and so we're looking forward to more conversations. And Niki, I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about Ryan. I love doing that, and I love talking about his life and his journey and how it's really helping others.
Well, this conversation is quite a gift. So thank you so much for sharing, and we'll end our call here. Until next time.
Thank you very much, Niki. All right, cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.